Hello everyone, this is Kawainame TV. This video is all about, what if Tenten is the future wife of Naruto Part 2. This story is a fanfiction. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Kindly click the bell button. Continue. Silently he began thinking of ways to improve upon his new charge's ability. If memory served him correctly, she had little to no problem with the tree climbing exercise, and the next step to learn better chakra control would be water walking, but he felt that may be a bit extreme for her if she was starting on tree climbing tomorrow. He sighed before walking out of the room. Walking through the hallway that leads from the room Team 7's men shared, he walked down the stairs that lead to the living room and out the front door and sat on the front steps of the porch. He closed his eyes and let the cold night air of Wave Country soothe him as he meditated. Concentrating inwardly, the darkness of his inner world started to fade until the mental image of himself standing in front of a large wooden red door with ornate golden foxes carved onto the door hinges. Grabbing at the familiar doorknob of his mindscape, he turned it and found that he couldn't, it was still locked to him. Outside of the cracks that littered the wall surrounding the door, it seemed untouched, much like it did when he first visited the door, when he first received his future memories. He sighed before turning and exiting the mindscape. Naruto opened his eyes before looking up into the night sky. It made no sense. Why was he cut off from his mindscape? Why could he not contact Kurama? The blonde was so wrapped up by his internal thoughts that he didn't even notice his pink-haired friend approach him from behind. "Penny, for your thoughts." He turned and glanced at Sakura as she sat down next to him on the stoop. He leaned back against the house, just thinking about what happened today. "What do you mean?" Naruto sighed. "It's just, I am not strong enough." Even after all the training that he had put himself through after regaining his memories, he still wasn't as strong as he will be. Would he ever get that strong as he is now? He understood that without the ability to access Kurama's chakra at will, he couldn't access the techniques that he created utilizing his chakra. He couldn't even access his golden coke, and even then he wouldn't be able to use it like he once did, but he at least figured that he could handle a fight with Zabuza without having trouble. The blonde looked over toward his pink friend and smiled. "You've come a long way since we graduated, though." Sakura smiled at her friend's praise of her ability. "It's only because you worried about me," she said before glancing down at the boards of the step below her. "Thanks for that. If it wasn't for you, then I probably would have died when the demon brothers attacked. Besides, Sasuke-kun has started to look at me more." Naruto smiled. His actions were starting to change the future, he knew it. With a bit more pushing and the Pinkett will be able to fill the void in Sasuke's here, and slowly love will replace the need for vengeance in his heart. "I didn't do it alone, because you want Sasuke-san to love you as much as you do him. That's why you're improving, so you can prove yourself to him." Came a voice behind them. Turning towards the door, they saw the bridge builder's daughter, Tsunami, peering out from the doorway. "Dinner's ready," she said as she turned and walked back inside. The duo nodded and followed in after her. Glancing back towards the Pinkett, Naruto couldn't help feeling somewhat bad. This plan of his was essentially feeding her obsession for the Uchiha. He was using her to achieve a better future. He didn't like how that felt, but his more logical adult mind knew it was necessary. 72 Chapter 7 Last chapter I wrote while rewatching the Zabuza fight because I don't remember it that well, and while I want to keep key events like the fight as canon as I can, I think I overdid it. Sorry. People are telling me to just kill Sasuke off now, but first you have to think, is that something Naruto would do? I don't believe so. I believe he would at the most try to save Sasuke from his hate. Then I think when he gets his curse mark, it's a lost cause, but by then they're in the village, so he would most likely wait for the Valley of the End. Don't want people finding the corpse. The power he receives from it further cements his behavior. There's an order of operations to things like this, and some of you may think I am just making it up as I go, but I am not. Sasuke still defects and Naruto kills him. However, what happens between then and now is what I wish to tell. Like I said once in a past chapter, Sakura fans, you're not going to like me come to the final chapter. Teehee. Morning came and Naruto's eyes fluttered open. The smell of freshly cooked food wafted through the air. The blonde looked around the plain beige room that he and the other males of Team 7 shared. Kakashi was already up and walking assisted with his crutch, and Sasuke was still asleep on his futon. The blonde walked up next to the raven-haired boy and peered down at him with cold eyes. It would be too easy for Naruto to pull a kunai out of his pouch and dig it into the Uchiha's skull. Orochimaru wouldn't be able to give him his curse mark. Sasuke would no longer be a threat. Many would say that this was his chance, the best chance for him to enact his plan, the perfect time to be done with his mission and live out the rest of his second life in peace, or relative peace until the Akatsuki started to move. He held a kunai out in front of himself and watched the reflection of himself in its cold steel, his eyes cut towards Sasuke as the Uchiha turned over in his sleep. Naruto could only imagine what his team would think. Sakura would feel betrayed by the man she had come to call friend, and Kakashi would most likely either try to kill him for bringing him back to Konoha in chains, the old bastards on the council would send him to the gallows for sure. He shook his head and put the kunai away in his pouch. He couldn't do that. While Sasuke was his most hated enemy, even he deserved a chance at life. He may be arrogant and annoying, but life is life, and Naruto had no right to take it before that life had a chance to turn down the dark path. Rest assured, Sasuke Uchiha, the moment you do something unforgivable, your life is mine. Naruto placed a hand on the Uchiha's shoulder and shook him awake. Sasuke looked up at the boy through sleepy eyes. Dobi. What do you want? Time to get up, Naruto said as he tried to not sound annoyed at the name of Dobi. Breakfast should be ready and we have training. The Uchiha nodded and the duo made their way down the stairs where their other two teammates were. The Pinkett saw the two first and smiled. Kakashi saw this and turned to glance at his two students. Morning, you two. Morning, sensei. HN. Team 7 and the family sat down to eat. The lady of the house, Tsunami, had prepared a lovely breakfast of eggs and ham. After breakfast, the silent son of Tsunami walked off to his room, not before sending a slight glare Team 7's way. The look went unnoticed by the others, but Naruto had been paying extra attention to Inari ever since they had arrived. Sensei, Sasuke said as he sat on Kakashi's right. What will you be teaching us? The silver-haired Jonin shook his head. I'll tell you when we get there, he said as he began to stand but fumbled slightly. Sakura saw this and quickly moved under him. Kakashi grunted before grabbing at his crutch. I am fine, Sakura, just gotta get used to walking with this thing. The team walked out of the house and into the dense woods behind it. Naruto watched in mild excitement as Kakashi explained the exercise. Tree climbing is simple once you get the hang of it. Simply channel chakra into the soles of your feet and walk up a tree. It's not only good for building up your control and reserves but also for building muscle mass since you're constantly defying gravity. If too much chakra is applied, then you'll shoot if the tree, if not enough, then you'll slide off. He watched as the Pinkett walked effortlessly up the tree. She was able to execute the exercise perfectly the first time, but this time, due to her extra training, she walked up the tree as if she was a seasoned shinobi. Naruto chuckled as he watched the prideful Uchiha fall off the tree and land on his head. Sasuke turned and glared at the blonde. Why don't you do it, Dobi? He said with a smirk, unless you're chicken. The blonde arched an eyebrow as he walked up to a tree with his arms folded. He glanced back towards the Uchiha and smirked before placing a single foot on the tree. And then the other. Sasuke sneered as he watched Naruto effortlessly walk up the tree and high-five Sakura when he reached the topmost branch. The blonde time traveler watched as the Uchiha attempted the exercise again only to fall on his head yet again. For Naruto, even though he hated Sasuke, it was still painful to watch. Sasuke-san, calm down, Naruto called from the branch he shared with Sakura. The Pinkett smiled as her friend offered her crush some advice. Just clear your mind and visualize your feet, Sakura shouted down to him. Naruto nodded. Yeah, think of them as a cup and your chakra like water. Fill the cup, Sasuke-san. He stood upon the branch and pointed down at the Uchiha. Fill the cup. Sakura giggled and shook her head at the blonde's antics. Kakashi smiled underneath his face mask and shook his head. The analogy of filling a foot-shaped cup was an odd one, but Naruto was an odd boy. Sasuke growled softly but closed his eyes and visualized a glass. Visualizing a foot-shaped glass was just too weird for him. He started off filling just enough to cover the bottom of the glass before trying again. He slipped off after 3 steps, but it was progressing. Naruto smiled as he watched the Uchiha try again before falling again. He smiled. At the very least, he was making fast progress and hopefully would have the exercise down by tomorrow so they could start on another exercise. While the blonde didn't want to feed Sasuke's ego, he did want him to grow stronger before the second phase of the Chunin exams. He would need it to defend himself against Orochimaru. The boy looked off into the horizon as he thought on the events to come. Orochimaru, one of the greatest S-ranked criminals that the village of Konoha had known since Madara Uchiha. During the Chunin exams, Sasuke was given the Snake Sanin's curse mark, which gave the Uchiha a taste of the power he had always craved, which had only made him crave even more, which led to him running to the snake bastard. Sakura noticed the look of intense contemplation on her blonde teammate's face. Naruto-kun, are you okay? Her sudden voice had snapped the Uzumaki out of his thoughts and the one activity that he had sworn he would never do. He was brooding, not over his fate of having to relive some of the more difficult events of his younger years or that he would have to re-kill the Akatsuki, no, he was brooding over the Uchiha. Nothing, just thinking. She arched an eyebrow. About. Naruto shook his head. He was prepared for the Pinkett to ask and had an appropriate lie ready to use. He didn't know how he felt about how easy it was becoming to lie. I may have asked Ten-chan to marry me and she may have said yes. He couldn't tell his pink friend that he was thinking about the fate of the man she loved, the same fate that would lead to him killing said love interest. Besides, it's not like he wouldn't remarry her in time. It'll just happen a little quicker than he would have thought. Sakura's eyes widened and she squealed in joy as she heard the news. She may not know much of the girl, but from the way Naruto talked of her, she was something special to him and that she was an experienced weapon specialist. The Pinkett hugged the blonde in excitement. That's amazing, I am happy for you. Naruto smiled as the Pinkett pulled herself off him. He looked down and saw that Sasuke was halfway up the tree. Things were progressing well. Perhaps tomorrow they could get Kakashi to show them some jutsu that could help them with their future fights. The blonde looked off into the direction that he believed that Konoha was. Tenten was familiar with waking up in the forest with the sound of the birds' morning songs, or the cool breeze of early mornings blowing through the trees above her. What she was not used to was waking up to her ever-energetic sensei screaming of youth. She zipped open her tent and peered out. What she saw was Guy and his clone Lee embracing with tears falling from their eyes. Guy broke the embrace when he noticed his lone female student before approaching her and lunging at her in an attempt to embrace her. She dodged the lunge and scurried away. Guy looked back at her. Tenten-san, my most youthful female student, I am overcome with youthful energy at hearing about your relationship. She arched an eyebrow in confusion as Neji walked up beside her. Lee told us about your relationship with Naruto Uzumaki, the fate-believing man said. Tenten blushed before glaring at Lee. The bull-haired boy smiled and struck a cool Guy pose. Guy stood up before clearing his throat, which gained the attention of his three charges. As much as I would like to congratulate young Tenten on this relationship, I am afraid we must continue on our journey to Suna. The bull-haired teacher said before the four of them. The young weapon mistress traveled at high speeds through the trees alongside her team with a smile on her face as she anticipated meeting with the Sand siblings again. However, Gaara would still be the murderous psychopath he was when they had first met him. Seeing Temari and Kankuro could be nice. It wasn't long before they arrived at the gate of Suna. Halt, said Asuna Jonin as he approached the Konoha ninja. State your names and business. Guy strolled up to the Suna Jonin. The man looked apprehensively at the bull-haired man. My name is Misato Guy and these are my students Negi Hyuga, Tenten, and Rock Lee. We come to deliver an invitation to the Kazekage about the upcoming Chunin exams, he said with a smile. The man nodded before stepping aside. You can find Kazekage-sama on the top floor of the tallest building, he said while pointing to a large sandstone building. Guy nodded and thanked the man before the team was moving again to deliver the message. As the group walked, Tenten was glancing around at the people in the marketplace. The vendors sold jewelry while others sold ninja tools. However, the merchandise wasn't what eventually caught her eye. No, that honor was her future blonde friend Temari. The wind mistress stood at a stall looking through the merchandise, each of her brothers on her flanks. The shop owner looked terrified, perhaps too scared to refuse service to anyone in the company of Gaara. The young weapon mistress glanced at the red-haired boy and was startled to find that he was staring at her. She smiled and waved nervously before running to catch up with her team, unaware that Gaara's narrowed eyes were following her. Once they reached the Kazekage's office, she noticed the Suna leader sitting at his desk reading over paperwork. She hummed in amusement as she knew the true enemy of all Kage, paperwork. More than once Naruto had come home late for came home complaining about the mountain of paperwork that he had waiting for him once he opened the door. The sand leader looked up from his paperwork before putting the paper down. Ah, Konoha nin, the man said. His voice seemed to radiate with power and his posture seemed to demand respect. I was made aware of your arrival. Yes, Kazekage-sama, we were sent to offer you an invitation to this year's Chunin exams held in Konoha, Guy said as he approached the man's desk. The leader nodded. Very well, you may tell your Hokage that I accept his invitation. Most youthful Kazekage-sama, Guy said before turning towards his team and smiled. Now let us return to Konoha so we can inform Hokage-sama of this decision. The wind shadow stood. No need, you all must be tired after your long journey. Please rest your heads for the night. Are you sure, sir? We would hate to impose, the cage simple nodded, Guy smirked. Very well, he turned towards his genin, what do you all think? Sure, my dogs are barking, Tenten said with a smile. She cared very little if she could stay in Suna or sleep in the forest, what she wanted to do was see Temari again. Even if they weren't friends now they will be with time, that and she wanted to know why Gaara seemed to glare at her when she saw him at the market. Might as well, Neji said flatly. He could care less. It is most youthful of you to offer, I would gladly accept, Lee said with a glint in his eye as he struck a cool guy pose. Later that afternoon, deep within the mind of the young weapon mistress lay a sleeping fox. He had been sleeping for months at this point, slowly regaining the power he had lost to force his host and himself back in time and to transfer the memories of the future to her mate. Kurama had risked quite a lot to enact their plans of changing the future, no longer could he call himself the nine-tailed fox strongest of all the Biju. He had sacrificed a great deal of his former power to complete the time leap and even more for the memory transfer, now you could hardly consider him the nine-tailed fox. His power now resembled that of his brother the Yonbi, the four-tailed monkey. Son Goku. The great fox's eye opened slightly, sniffing around. He could smell the sense of the room his host was in. Due to the new seal on Tenten's body he could experience the world around him through her sense. That's when he felt it, a strong presence, a very malevolent chakra. Shukaku. The fox stood upright as he noticed his brother's chakra signature getting closer to his host. Girl. The great fox shouted from within her mind, Tenten not being read for his shouting cupped her hands over her ears. What the hell was that? Who do you think it is? The weapon mistress's eyes shot wide open as the realization hit her, Kurama was still in her body. But why? Kurama, is that you? Yes, now we don't have much time, Gaara is coming. You're in danger. Tenten lifted her shirt slightly and noticed a seal in the shape of a fox's head on her stomach. Was this the price she paid for being sent back in time? How long has this been noticeable? How Naruto seen it and not informed her about it? She glanced from her fox seal to the door. Gaara was coming. Did he know? Was he coming to kill her? Alright, but I have so many questions. Then came the knocking at the door. The young Kunoichi narrowed her eyes at the door, knowing full well that the psychopathic Gaara was on the other side. She opened the door to see the red-headed Jinchuriki standing there with his two siblings. Well, if this wasn't a surprise, Tenten commented as the three sand siblings walked into her room. Who are you? Gaara said. His voice sounded tired, more than likely due to the fact that the Shikaku won't let him sleep. Why does mother want your blood? Temari and Kankuro looked shocked as they glanced from their younger brother to the bun-haired girl whose facial expression did not change after receiving a death threat from Gaara. Tenten smiled. I didn't expect to see you so soon, Gaara of the Sand. The Suna Genin's brow furrowed. How do you know my name? Are you an assassin? She blinked before looking over his shoulder at Temari before looking back to him. Nope. I am here with my team to deliver a message to the cage, she said with a soft smile. Gaara became frustrated and stamped his foot, which alerted his two siblings that something bad was about to happen. Then how? Simple, the bun-haired girl said. Kyuubi told me. This information seemed to stun the three Genins of the Sand. Temari, who had heard rumor of the Kyuubi, was afraid of its mighty power. For good reason, it was the strongest of all the Biju. Kankuro arched an eyebrow at this as he was taught that the fox had been killed by the fourth Hokage. Hey. Are you? It's Jinchuriki. Temari asked in fear. If Gaara could do so much damage as he could with only the one tail in him, then what could a person with the 9 tails do? Tenten shook her head. Sort of, she admitted. It wasn't like she could lie to her best friend, even if she had no idea you two were best friends. Temari arched an eyebrow in confusion as she looked the girl up and down. Kankuro looked at his brother as Gaara started to grow frustrated with the bun girl. Besides, you needn't worry about me, it's my fiancé that you should worry about. Kankuro grew confused. What's that supposed to mean? Tenten smiled lovingly as she thought about her blonde soulmate. He's my other half in more ways than one. Gaara narrowed his eyes at the girl before storming off. His siblings followed closely behind him. Temari placed a hand on his shoulder. Gaara-san, don't let her get to you, remember the plan. However, Gaara wasn't paying attention because mother wanted her blood. He didn't know why, but one thing was for sure, that she was strong, far stronger than she was letting on. He could practically feel the Biju chakra. Tenten watched as the trio left until the sound of her rumbling stomach began to growl. She frowned before heading out for the local food stand. Walking out of the inn, she turned towards the small cafe next door, unaware she was being watched. Entering the building, she quickly noticed two of the three Sand siblings. Tenten smiled as she saw a slight smile on the face of the blonde. Kankuro and Tamari arched an eyebrow as the bun girl saw on the other side of the booth facing them, "Fancy running into you too, where's Gaara?" "He's out," Kankuro said while crossing his arms. "What do you want, bun girl?" which earned him a glare from Tenten and an elbow to the ribs from Tamari for being rude. "The name's Tenten, future wife of Konoha's future Hokage," she said proudly. She looked at the two and frowned. "Do the cooks try to poison Gaara? Is that why he's not here?" "That's right, you did say something about a fiancé," Tamari said, recalling their earlier conversation at the inn. The weapon user nodded. "Why would they try and poison him?" The bun-haired girl looked into the wind mistress's eyes. "Because he's a Jinchuriki, ain't he?" The two Sand siblings stared at the Konoha kunoichi as if they had seen a ghost. No one outside of the village was to know Gaara's condition. "How do you know?" Kankuro said with a certain edge to his voice that alerted the two kunoichi that the wrong answer promised pain. Tenten smirked. "Living with a Jinchuriki, I've gotten pretty good at finding the others." She lied. Future knowledge was good for some things after all, that and having a fraction of the mightiest of the Biju inside of her helped. The Sand siblings paled. "There are others." Kankuro paled, knowing the destructive power Gaara possessed, and to imagine more people like him or even stronger than him was terrifying. "You live with one." Tamari seemed to fear this girl slightly more. If she could handle a Jinchuriki's psychopathic tendencies and still be as happy as she was, then something was seriously wrong with her. "Of course, we're engaged," she said as the waitress left, having received the young weapon mistress's order. Tenten turned to look back at the Sand siblings. Much to her secret amusement, they looked at her as if she had grown a second head. She arched an eyebrow and tilted her head to the left slightly. "What?" Tamari decided to answer as her brother seemed too shocked by the fact that this girl lived with someone like Gaara. Even for them who were his family, it was hard to be around him. Even if she hated to admit it, but she was afraid of her little brother. "How do you deal with it? I mean Gaara's psychopathic, homicidal and nothing but angry." Tenten finished the blonde's sentence for her. Tamari nodded and the Konoha ninja could see the look of guilt in her eyes. She didn't want to think of her brother like that. It hurt her more than anyone knew. "My Naruto-kun is nothing like that, even if he does have every right to be." Kankuro, who had broken from his stupor, looked at the girl. "What do you mean? Wouldn't you feel hurt if he, started being all cold and stuff?" She didn't know how to answer that. She adopted a thinking pose. "Maybe if he attacks our friends or my two San." She placed a hand on her chin. "But the civilians and some shinobi deserve it." She looked out the window thoughtfully. "He was an orphan, she said. Everyone old enough to remember the Kyuubi attack knew of his status and hated him for it, and taught the children to hate him as well." The Sand siblings looked at the girl with carrying emotions on their faces. Tamari felt bad for this Naruto person, if only because Gaara could have easily lived like that, hated by the village, hated by the children, but instead they feared him. In some ways, to be feared is better than being hated. Tenten shook her head of the thought of the violence that was Naruto's childhood. Luckily meetings were minimal, but it truly was a sad existence to be ignored. "He could have turned out just like your brother." "How so?" Kankuro asked. "If he didn't have people who genuinely cared for him growing up." She shook her head. That little tidbit of information made the wind specialist think about their childhood with Gaara, how their father kept them separated from him along with the assassination on attempts. No wonder he turned out the way he had. The blonde time traveler lay there in the grass of the forest as he dreamed his dreams. The night prior he had blown up at young Inari for the words he spoke about suffering. He spent the rest of the night training and thinking about how he spoke to the boy and felt bad for yelling at him. It's just that it was so infuriating. Here he is complaining about suffering and loss while sitting in a warm and loving home eating an actual meal while people in this very village struggled to get what he has, some even going hungry tonight. Talking like he owns the rights to suffering while Naruto had spent countless nights alone, cold and hungry. Even Sasuke had more of a right to brood than he did. Naruto had woken slightly when he started to hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps. He kept his eyes closed and his face as neutral as possible, but smiled internally because he knew it was Haku. He only opened his eyes when he felt the ice ninja poking at his cheek. He cracked open an eye. "Oh," Haku said tentatively, "I didn't mean to wake you." Naruto sat up before holding a hand over his mouth to hide his yawn. "It's fine, really shouldn't be sleeping out here anyway." Haku stood up while holding his basket of herbs. "What are you doing out here?" "Training." The long-haired man arched an eyebrow. "Training? Are you a ninja?" Naruto nodded at the question and smiled. Yup, and not just any ninja, he said before standing. I am gonna be the future Hokage of Konoha. Haku smiled slightly at hearing the boy's dream. It was nice to have a dream. Hokage, huh? Then you should know that to be strong what you need is someone to protect. Naruto finished for him. Haku nodded. So do you have that someone? The long-haired boy asked. Naruto nodded. It wasn't like he had just one person he was to protect but instead an entire village. Sure, he could say something cheesy and romantic about Tenten and it would be true. He would sooner die than let anything bad happen to her. Though she would probably kick his rear end all the way back to Konoha for saying such a thing, she was a fierce kunoichi whose skill with a blade was unmatched. The blonde looked at Haku. Can I ask you something? The brunette smiled. You just did. Naruto deadpanned at this and the boy chuckled. What is it? He said with a sweet smile. What's with the basket? Picking flowers, the blonde said with his hand cupped behind his head. Haku looked from him to the basket. I am collecting herbs, my friend, you see. They're sick. The blonde adopted concerned features. Well, I hope he's okay, which alerted Haku slightly. I didn't say it was a he. Though the fake hunter ninja kept his stoic expression as to not tip of his enemy that he didn't trust him. Thank you, I too hope he recovers quick. The blonde smirked as the fake hunter turned and started walking away, though he tried his best to hide it. Haku's shoulders were rigid. Until next time, he said in a sweet voice, Hunter-san. This caused Haku to freeze momentarily as he slid his right hand into his left sleeve and retrieved some of his hidden senbon. In one motion he turned and unleashed the volley of deadly needles. Naruto jumped back. Whoa. Haku retrieved another set of senbon but did not lob them at the blonde. Naruto held both hands up in mock surrender. I am not looking for a fight, he said with a nervous chuckle. Haku narrowed his eyes. How is it you know I was the hunter nin? He said through gritted teeth. Naruto blinked. You'll be surprised at the things I know. He smiled, but when he saw that Haku hadn't relaxed, he sighed. I have a really good sense of smell. I can also smell Zabuza-san on you. And what do you plan to do with the information of his continued existence? The brunette said, still ready to attack should the blonde make a move that he deemed as hostile. The blonde shook his head. Nothing, besides they already know, besides I have no intention of making enemies of either you nor one of the 7 swordsmen. Hearing the boy's words made Haku relax slightly but not drop his guard or put away his weapons, much to Naruto's chagrin. Suddenly inspiration struck. The young time traveler smiled. I have a proposition for you. 72 Chapter 8. Hello everyone, I am glad you all could make it. Sorry, it took so long to finish this chapter. Things at work had been crazy stressful with the holiday season and all. That wasn't the only reason for my inability to finish this chapter during the self-imposed deadline that I created, for the enemy has barred its head once again, the bane of my existence, fight scenes. Why are fight scenes so hard to write? At first I thought it was just me, but I talked with a friend of mine that writes fanfiction. He and I work together. He has similar problems with fight scenes. That happened then both Pokemon Sword and Shield dropped. I managed to beat that with a mono bug team. Then I also had to play Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which was awesome. When Haku went out to collect herbs to heal the Mist Swordsman's injuries, Zabuza didn't expect him to return with the same blonde that had fought against him. At first, Zabuza was furious thinking that Haku had betrayed him but soon discovered the reason for the blonde's arrival. I propose an alliance, Naruto spoke with an edge to his voice that seemed to command authority. The Mist Demon arched an eyebrow in confusion as he stared at the young genin. Not receiving a tongue lashing from the swordsman, Naruto continued, stop coming for Tazuna-san head and you too. He pointed from Zabuza to Haku. I can get you positions in Konoha's shinobi force. Haku looked at the boy through wide eyes for a moment before turning away. How could such a child offer such a thing? What power did he have to make such a claim? But that wasn't the only thing on the young ice wielder's mind, for Naruto said this with such confidence. Zabuza began to chuckle. No deal. Naruto frowned at this. We have a mission and your games will not get in the way of that. The blonde time traveler sighed. It's no game, Zabuza-san. Someone like Gato would never honor the price you've agreed upon. He'll sooner stab you in the back, he said. While I offer you salvation from the hunters that are tracking you and a place to rest your heads for the night. The swordsman scoffed. Gato's no match for me. If he tries, then he'll surely regret it. Naruto rolled his eyes at the man's overconfidence. Clearly, Naruto said after a moment, if you're at your best, that's why he'll only strike after the fight between you and my team when you're weak. Haku stared at the boy that stood next to him. What made this boy believe that Zabuza could be defeated, let alone be seen as weak? Though it was logical for a swine like Gato to strike when his opponent was at his weakest. Zabuza scoffed, "You pathetic lot wouldn't even be a challenge for me." The blonde's left eye twitched slightly, sure he didn't think convincing Zabuza to disobey his current contract would be easy, but the man just making this hard for the blonde. Naruto lifted his arm, which made Haku twitch slightly as he went to grab his senbon. The blonde sighed and messages the bridge of his nose. "So there's nothing I can say to convince you?" "Not a chance," the masked man snarled. "I would sooner fall on my blade than work with Konoha." The boy scratched at the back of his head. "Damn, I was hoping we could work together." "Oh well," he said as his arm fell to his side and a kunai slid into his hand. Haku noticed this and in a quick motion volleyed a set of senbon that embedded themselves within the blonde's arm. Poof! Haku blinked as the blonde exploded into smoke. Naruto sighed as the memories of his clone began to come to him. Damn him, Zabuza was a stubborn fool. The blonde frowned as he cupped his hands behind his head. The plan to work with the duo of missing nin was a bust, undone by the ego and hubris of the man feared as a demon. He needed a new plan. The future cooperation of Zabuza and Haku could be tremendously helpful in his efforts to kill Sasuke. Naruto shook his head, thinking about it wouldn't help him. If Zabuza was too much of a fool to ally himself with the blonde, then there was no skin off Naruto's nose. "Glad you could join us, Naruto." The blonde's attention shifted from his thoughts to the man who spoke. Kakashi stood with Sasuke and Sakura to his flanks. The cycloptic man sighed. "Now let's get to training." "Sensei," the silver-haired Jonin glanced at his pink-haired charge. "Can we train in something else? Naruto-kun and I already completed the exercise." The man hummed as he heard this. "All right," he sighed. Naruto's eye twitched at the man's bored tone. "Today we'll learn you elemental affinities." Naruto smiled as his eyes gained a bright gleam. Elemental manipulation was something he had just barely managed to scratch the surface of in his training. He couldn't train in it with the others around and have them grow suspicions of his exponential growth. But now he could train in his wind affinity without a care in the world. Elemental affinity. "What's that, sensei?" Sakura asked with raised eyebrows. Kakashi's right hand disappeared into his kunai pouch and returned with 3 pieces of paper in his hand. Elemental affinities are something everyone who can use chakra is born with. There are 5 different affinities. Water, fire, wind, earth, lightning. He listed the 5 elements as he handed the genin a paper each. These papers are made from a special tree that can be used to test your affinities. Just channel some chakra into the paper and I'll let you what you get. Sakura stared at the man before turning her attention back towards the paper in her hand. Narrowing her eyes, she pulled upon the warmth that was chakra. Leading it through her body to her arm and finally into the paper, she watched in amazement as the paper seemed to crumble into dust. "An earth affinity," Kakashi said with his trademark eye smile. Sasuke channeled some chakra into his paper. The parchment crumpled into a ball before being engulfed in fire. "You're an Uchiha, so a fire affinity's a given, but to have a secondary lightning affinity is impressive." Sasuke smirked arrogantly and Naruto sighed as he saw it. The blonde already knew what his affinity was. Wind, nothing special, nothing more, just wind. One of the rarest affinities to have in Fire Country. He channeled chakra into the paper and stared in shock. Contrary to last time he learned of his affinity where the paper only slips into, this time the paper seemed to dampen significantly and split 3 times. Kakashi smiled under his face mask. "Nicely done, Naruto. You have 2 strong affinities for water and wind," the Cyclops said. Naruto remained speechless as he stared at the damp pieces of chakra paper in his hand, completely oblivious to Sakura's congratulations. Why had he gained an affinity? Could it have been Kurama? Naruto furrowed his brow as he thought on this. The furball may have gifted him a secondary affinity when he transferred himself into the younger Naruto. He shook his head. No time to dwell on that. He would simply ask him when he saw him again. Kakashi cleared his throat, before making a hand sign Naruto had never seen him make. Before the genin knew what was happening, 2 other Kakashis poofed into existence. Naruto was awed that the man could perform the shadow clone jutsu. He had never done that before. "Whoa," the blonde said, "I didn't know you knew the shadow clone jutsu, Kakashi-sensei." The silver-haired man nodded. "Of course, though I can't use it as you do. You simply have more chakra than I do." He said this idly without thinking and didn't notice the looks of shock that appeared on his other 2 students' faces. "Now, each of you will go with a clone and will learn a jutsu for your elements." The Kakashis split up and took each of the kids. Naruto stood watching as his Kakashi took 2 scrolls from his vest. "Alright Naruto, I'll be teaching you the wind bullet jutsu and water prison jutsu." Tenten strolled through the streets of Suna, basking in the cool air of the early morning. Today was the day of Team 9's departure, which was why she was out and about. Suna was known for many things like sand and its abundance of shinobi with the wind affinity, but neither of these things interested her at the moment. No, the reason she was in the street was to pick up Suna's famous jelly-filled dumplings. They were the weapon mistress's favorite treat in the future. If she let an opportunity to grab a couple dozen of them slip by, she would sorely regret it. Just the thought of the salty and crunchy exterior and sweat-juicy jelly interior made her mouth water. Temari would often bring them when she came to visit for diplomatic reasons. In a few years, the small stand would expand, but in this time period, the stand was no bigger than Naruto's favorite ramen stand. The shopkeeper, an older man with rich brown eyes and matching hair, smiled at her. "Hello ma'am, what can I get you today?" Tenten smiled and took a sniff. The aroma of the dumplings filled her nostrils. "I would like 2 dozen of your jelly dumplings, please." The shopkeeper looked at her. All right," he stuttered out before going to work collecting her order. Tenten smiled in anticipation of the sweet and savory confection. She turned her back to the stall and watched as the people made their way through the street. Her smile widened when she saw Temari. "Temari-chan," she exclaimed. The wind mistress turned toward the voice before walking up to the bun girl. "Morning," she said with a small smile. "Shouldn't you and your team be getting ready to leave?" The bun girl nodded. "They are. I am just getting some treats for the road." The sand kunoichi arched an eyebrow. "Treats?" "Yup, buying 2 dozen jelly dumplings," she said as the man handed her 4 boxes that contained 6 dumplings each. She smiled before handing the kind shopkeeper his money. Tenten opened a box and handed Temari a dumpling. "Want one?" Temari accepted the treat before plopping it into her mouth. She smiled satisfactorily. "Delicious." The weapon mistress nodded her agreement as she popped one of the savory sweet confections into her mouth. Her and Temari walked down the street and nibbled on the delicious treats. They passed many civilians, some shopping and others loitering. Tenten couldn't wait to get home and rest in her bed and get ready for the upcoming Chunin exams. This time around things would be different. This time the wind woman standing next to her wouldn't come out victorious. She was a Jinchuriki, half Jinchuriki, pseudo Jinchuriki, whatever you call her. She was different from what she was then. The bun girl looked at the fan wielder that walked next to her. "So, you going to be participating in the Chunin exams?" Temari nodded. "Yeah." Her eyes dropped slightly as she thought of how her brother, Gaara, wasn't someone that should be led around other people. "I can't wait to show you around," she said with excitement in her voice. Temari glanced at her and smiled. "And don't worry about Gaara." "What makes you say that?" The Konoha Kanoichi swallowed another dumpling. "Naruto-kun will set him straight," she said with a tone of voice that made her sound so certain. Temari didn't know what to make of this girl. Where did she get this confidence from, and why on earth would it be placed in a Jinchuriki? Temari was about to speak but was interrupted by a boy wearing an all-green spandex suit. "Tenten-chan," the boy exclaimed, "how is my most youthful teammate?" The sand Kanoichi was taken aback by the boy's boisterous personality. If it bothers Tenten, she didn't show it. "I am fine, Lee-san, are we ready to go?" Lee nodded vigorously before returning to the side of what looked like an older clone of himself and a boy with the unmistakable eyes of the Hyuga. The bun girl turned to Temari. "Welp, I am off," she said while handing the wind mistress another dumpling. "Till we meet in the Chunin exams." The sand Kanoichi nodded. "You bet." Konoha's Team 9 left the village gates of Suna for their long journey home. Tenten couldn't help but be sad to be leaving her friend. She was all too accustomed to her living in Konoha. With a sigh, she joined her team up in the trees. Guy seemed to be smiling brightly as ever as he encouraged his youthful students. Lee seemed to be eating up every word of the man's tirade. Neji scoffed and glanced at Tenten. "What? You shouldn't be consorting with the enemy," the Hyuga said in a superior tone of voice. Tenten scoffed. She hated this Neji. "We were just talking. Besides, last I checked, Konoha and Suna were allies," she said before speeding ahead of him. The villages were allies, and coming soon that alliance would be tested. She hoped they could do something to stop it. Not likely. She was startled by the voice in her head. She almost forgot she contained a fragment of Kurama within her, part of the yin chakra Minato severed from the Kyuubi before sealing its yang half into Naruto. "What do you mean, not likely?" Kurama smirked from within the weapons mistress's mind. "Time is a delicate thing, it can only take but so much deviation before crumbling." Tenten thought on this as she and her team leapt through the trees leading to Konoha. Waking from the previous day's training, Naruto stared at the ceiling of the guest room. He blinked and rubbed the sleep from his eyes as he sat up. The first thing he saw was the lady of the house, Tsunami. Morning, Tsunami-chan. The mother looked at him. Sorry, did I wake you? Kakashi-san said you should rest, you came home pretty late last night, she said as she approached him. Naruto looked at her before looking out the window that he lay beside. What time is it? Tsunami arched an eyebrow and looked at a wall clock that hung just above the window. Almost 10:30 a.m. The blonde nodded, thankful he hadn't overslept and missed Gato's thugs. He looked at the woman as she walked out of the room, he made a simple hand sign and a puff of smoke. Later a Naruto clone stood directly next to him. Protect them, the original order. Getting a nod from the clone, Naruto opened the window and jumped through it. Leaping from roof to roof, the blonde spotted the thugs he had beaten before, he moved slightly to intercept them but turned and moved back towards the bridge. This was the defining moment for Inari, these goons played a very important role in it and the blonde time traveler was not going to interfere with that. Approaching the bridge, Naruto could see the mist consume his friends, thankfully the ice mirrors hadn't been erected. He smiled slightly at this, thanking Kami that he didn't have to infiltrate the dome again. Thanks for waking me up, Naruto said once he arrived. Zabuza smirked as he saw the blonde. Welcome to the party, Blondie. Naruto scowled at this, he did not like being called Blondie. Not like one more genin will keep me from killing you, lot. Naruto glanced from the mist demon to the boy in the fake hunter mask, his eyes glowed with resolve. Hello Zabu-chan, the bandaged man snarled at the boy as he took a stance. Haku's eyes softened behind his mask at the appearance of the blonde, his form brought back memories of his offer. Salvation from their pursuers, from the Mizukage's unjust bloodline war, a place to call home. However, Zabuza was a stubborn man that is very set in his way, the freedom to do what he wanted when he wanted, to kill when he wanted, no he wouldn't surrender that for a place to belong. Making a single hand sign, Zabuza conjured up a heavy mist. Naruto, however, was prepared for as he weaved through hand signs. Wind style. Great breakthrough, the blonde Jinchuriki exclaimed as he pushed his palms outward and a powerful gust of wind erased the mist. Kakashi leapt into action and engaged Zabuza. Haku went to aid his master but was interrupted as Sasuke hurled a great fireball at the boy. Nice Sasuke-san, Naruto said as he watched the Ravenet and the masked ninja stood kunai against kunai with the lone Uchiha, his eyes narrowed under his mask as he watched the blonde approach. With a deep breath, he was thankful that the rain from the night prior had been as heavy as it was. Kakashi watched in amazement as the fake hunter weaved through hand signs using only a single hand. It was uncommon for this to be done and it took much concentration to do. One had to be extremely focused or be very familiar with the jutsu, ice style, thousand senbon of death. Kakashi's one visible eye widened. Ice style was a Kekkei Genkei of the Yuki clan of Kurigakure no Soda. He had heard that the entire clan had been killed due to the 4th Mizukage's bloodline civil war. The leader feared the shinobi of these special bloodlines and sought to destroy them all. The cycloptic Jonin moved to aid his genin but was then stopped as Zabuza lunged toward him with his oversized blade. Kakashi blocked said blade with a kunai. Not so fast Hataki, Zabuza smirked behind his bandages. Your fights with me. The silver-haired Jonin watched helplessly as the ice needles barreled down toward his student. Sasuke glanced around before gritting his teeth and closing his eyes. Come on Sasuke, he thought to himself, remember the training, draw on my chakra. He focused inward, searching for the warmth that was his chakra. The Ravenet's eyes opened wide as he pulled upon the warmth. Remember the academy, chakra can be used for many things, such as increasing physical abilities. Sakura watched as her longtime crush was helpless to dodge the ice needles. Haku sneered underneath his mask. He hated killing, absolutely detested it, but to complete the mission and protect his master he had to force himself to take life, or so he thought. Suddenly Sasuke appeared at his backside. Seems you're not as fast as you think. Sasuke kicked the fake hunter away. Haku twirled as his trajectory slowed. Naruto saw this and made a single hand sign before another Naruto popped into existence. The two blondes nodded at each other. The original clenched his fist tightly as he channeled as much Biju chakra into his fist as possible. The clone slid underneath a now standing Haku before turning on the masked shinobi and went to strike the brunette. However, Haku anticipated this and blocked the strike with his palms. The clone smirked and poofed out of existence and the original struck with his Biju enhanced fist. The boy jumped away in surprise as the blonde's fist made contact with the bridge. The ground splintered as Haku cursed himself for letting his guard down around Naruto. Rookie mistake, he scolded himself. From his position with Zabuza, Kakashi smiled underneath his face mask. Naruto had grown since they had become a team greatly. His strategy was sound, the fake hunter had already noticed him, and since the blonde's true skill set was still unknown to the enemy, he had created a shadow clone to distract the masked shinobi, and when he was distracted he struck. It was a sound strategy that would have worked if his opponent was anyone else. However, this shinobi had mountains more experience than Naruto did. "Don't take your eyes off me," Zabuza exclaimed as he swung the behemoth's sword. Kakashi ducked to strike. "Wouldn't dream of it," the silver-haired Jonin said. Inari watched as the two thuggish men entered his home. He stood there helplessly as he watched the men approach. The young boy trembled as he saw the two men. One was a man with ash-gray hair and a faded blue hoodie with a white sash around his waist holding up his katana. The other was a shirtless man with bandages on his stomach. He wore his brown hair in three buns, one on the bottom of his hairline just above the nape of the neck, one on the center back side of the head, and another just above his forehead. He had a brown bears and wore an eye patch over his right eye. Inari stood between the men and his mother Tsunami, who he swore he would protect from the two swordsmen that had cut through the very wall of their home. "You're the daughter of Tazuna, right?" the ashen gray-haired man said with a devilish smirk plastered across his face that promised pain. Inari gulped. "Sorry, but you're going to have to come with us." When it became clear neither Inari or Tsunami would move, the shirtless man moved in. He lunged forward and backhanded the small child across the face, making the boy crash against the wall. The ashen-haired man glanced at Inari. "We're only for the women," he said before turning back toward the now kneeling Tsunami. Tears stung her eyes, not only because of fear for her safety but also fear for the well-being of her child. "She'll make an excellent hostage." Hostage. The word echoed through the child's mind as if the word were screamed into a large valley. He couldn't allow these men to take his mother and do Kami knows what to her. The boy shakily stood his ground. "I have to be brave," Inari thought to himself, "to save Ka-san." The mother saw this. "Inari-chan," she exclaimed, gaining the attention of everyone in the room. "Don't move, I can't have you getting hurt." "But, listen to your Ka-san, kid," the ashen-haired man said. He smirked as he placed a hand on the hilt of his sword. "You wouldn't want to get hurt." He unsheathed an inch of the blade. "Would you?" "Stop," Tsunami shouted. If you hurt him, swear I'll bite my tongue off," the young mother said, hoping beyond hope that they valued her as a hostage enough not to attack her son. The man resheathed his blade with a satisfying click. "It's your lucky day, kid," the man said. "We need her alive, so you should be thanking her." The shirtless man narrowed his eyes in annoyance. "Man, this isn't enough." "Relax, you just tried out your new sword. You should be satisfied." The eye patch wearing man scratched his bandaged stomach. "Boar blood is unfit to christen a fine blade," the man said as he turned towards Tsunami. "Though I wouldn't mind christening my blade with her juices," the man said with a perverse grin as he went to grab the woman. Tsunami flinched away, and just as she did, a three-pronged kunai embedded itself within the man's hand. The shirtless man pulled his arm back in pain. "What the hell? If you dare touch her," said a voice from the corner of the room. The thugs, including Inari and Tsunami, looked in the direction of the voice only to find Naruto standing there with hate in his eyes. Naruto Uzumaki was many things: Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, proud holder of the title, prankster from hell, time traveler, future husband of Tenten, but there was one thing no one could dispute. Naruto Uzumaki hated rapists to the very center of his core. "I'll kill you," Naruto said as he summoned a small portion of Kurama's chakra. The young Jinchuriki flashed awe of existence before reappearing in front of the man. His right hand gripped the kunai of his father while in his left was a fully charged Rasengan. The shirtless man was sent spiraling through the hole he cut into the side of the house. The ashen-haired man glanced from the path his friend had been shot out of to the boy who had attacked them. Quickly he went to grab at his sword but stopped when he felt a fist impact itself with his stomach. He fell to Naruto's Biju-enhanced strength. "Naruto ni," Inari said as he stared in awe at the blonde who had saved his mother. Tsunami was doing the same with soft eyes and a wide smile. She was beyond thankful to the young blonde for not only saving her son but herself as well. Naruto turned toward the mother and son. "You guys wouldn't have any rope, would you?" Naruto watched over Haku's shoulder as Kakashi's hand glowed and the air around it crackled with electricity. This was the copycat ninja's only original jutsu, Chidori. Naruto stood above Sasuke. The young Uchiha looked like a pin cushion, what with all the Senbon sticking out of him. The blonde lunged at Haku. Kunai clashed with the fake hunter's Senbon with an audible clang. "It's a shame, Haku-san, we could be friends." The boy smiled underneath his mask. I would have liked that, he admitted, perhaps in another life. There was a pregnant pause. I would have liked a home. Naruto smiled. Then why fight me? You don't have to be on the run anymore. The fake hunter shook his head. My life belongs to Zabuza-sama, he saved me. Haku pulled his Senbon away before taking a single step backward and removing his mask. Where I come from, I'm hunted because I possess a bloodline. He saved me from that hell. Haku smiled at Naruto before turning around and rushing to Zabuza's side. Naruto's eyes grew panicked. He couldn't let it happen again, not again. Naruto grit his teeth as he felt himself draw upon Kurama's chakra. He felt his teeth grow and sharpen into fangs, his fingernails elongating into claws. Weaving through hand signs, water style, syrup trap, the blonde exclaimed as the water around them rose from the ground and gathered at his arms. He thrust his hands forward and the water stretched out and clung to Haku. The brunette's eyes widened before he tried to freeze the water that clung to him. As he tried, he saw this aura of red that surrounded Naruto travel from himself to the water. This aura was hot enough to prevent him from freezing the water. He turned and saw Kakashi's Chidori approach Zabuza. His eyes widened in fear before he threw a Senbon as quickly and accurately as he could. He smiled thankfully as the Senbon found its target in the Konoha Jonin's neck. Silence overtook them all as Haku fell to the ground. The red aura had started to encase him, and to his surprise, it wasn't as hot as it at first appeared. Then he felt a headache of unknown origin as he saw memories, not his own. Haku! Zabuza shouted to no avail. Haku wasn't responding to the man's orders. Clap clap clap. The group turned to face the source of the noise and saw a group of mercenaries, and in the center of the group was a short plump man. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he saw the man that had led Wave Country into poverty. Gato smirked as he glanced at the bandaged man. Well. Look at the so-called demon, beaten by children. Zabuza snarled. Gato, what's the meaning of this? The short round man looked to his small army of thugs and back toward the bandaged man. Business, Zabuza, for what I am paying you I can afford all these men. He pointed his thumb behind him. So I decided to cut my losses. Zabuza's teeth ground together under his bandages. Glancing to his left he saw the young blonde he had spoken with yesterday. Looks like we're no longer enemies. Looks that way, Naruto said as he walked up to Zabuza. I think I'll hold my I told you so for later, the blonde said, which earned him a slight chuckle from the missing nin. The young time traveler bent over and picked up Haku before smiling at him. Looks like we're friends again, Haku smiled underneath his mask as Naruto helped him up. The brunette moved to remove his mask. Looks like it, he said as he threw the mask to the side. Sorry about your comrade. Naruto shook his head. Don't worry about it, he's not worth being sorry over. The blonde said this last part as he turned back toward the group of thugs. He missed the questioning look Haku gave him. Blondie! Zabuza exclaimed as he bit through the bandages that covered his mouth. Naruto was seriously beginning to hate being called that. Give me a kunai. Naruto walked over to the man known as the Demon of Blood Mist Village and placed the hilt of the kunai in his mouth. Zabuza gripped the metallic weapon with his teeth. Naruto sighed as he wished Haku had incapacitated Kakashi sooner so Zabuza could have feeling in at least one arm. I so don't want that kunai back. Naruto eyed the group of thugs and let out a breath. He arched an eyebrow as he visibly saw the breath he took. It wasn't cold enough for his breath to be visible. He turned and looked at Haku. The brunette looked at him with a questioning gaze. The young ice ninja looked at the blonde confused but slightly startled. He hadn't been using his ice techniques, so why was his breath visible? Haku glanced down at the bridge underneath their feet and was startled to see that the small water puddles around Naruto's feet were frozen. Brat! Zabuza started gaining the attention of the two younger ninjas. Gato's mine, he snarled as he charged forward. His arm flailed behind him limply as he approached his target. Gato's eyes widened in fear as he took a step backward. Kill him! He exclaimed in terror as he turned and ran to the back of the group. Two thugs smiled and stepped in the path of the mist demon before trying to draw their swords. However, Zabuza hadn't been made one of the 7 swordsmen for nothing. He plunged the kunai into the stomach of the man to his left and ripping upward before turning to the other. He eyed the man before turning back toward the midget tyrant. Haku had engaged the man before his master had the chance to. Naruto smirked. Glancing behind him, he saw Tazuna standing over a knelt Sakura as she wept for the unconscious Uchiha. Turning back, he charged in and blocked a man's sword as it was about to strike the demon of the mist. Nah, the young blonde said as he pushed the man's sword aside with a kunai. Zabu-chan's busy at the moment. I would ask you to leave a message. The time traveler nailed the man between the eyes with his kunai. But you're already dead. Gato made his way to the edge of the bridge before grasping his knees and panting before turning around only to see his men being flung about by the three men. He paled when he saw Zabuza approaching him with incredible speeds. Demon. The man lunged toward the tyrant with kunai in mouth, stabbing into his plumb stomach he ripped upward. Gato coughed up blood as the kunai was removed from him. Clutching at his chest he felt the warm red liquid seep through his fingers. Why, you bastard, said as he stumbled to the side. If you have a death wish, don't drag me down T2. Zabuza stood at his full height only to have several swords and spears plunged into his back. The man's mouth leaked blood but he wasn't done. Gato was still alive, so that meant his job was not done. He lunged towards the man and sliced diagonally across his chest before kneeing the man in the stomach, which threw him off the bridge and into the water's bellow. The men behind the missing nin stared at the man known as the demon with fear. He had just killed Gato, one of the most feared and influential men in all of the elemental nations. Zabuza turned and the remaining men that were still alive parted to make a path for the man. The man wandered toward the blonde Jinchuriki. Naruto stared in shock as the man collapsed in front of him. Zabuza-sama, Haku exclaimed as he ran to his master's side before his hands glowed with green chakra. The demon shook his head before Haku could sully his hands with his blood. No H. Haku-san, he said weakly, I am not gonna make it. Zabuza-sama, please, Haku pleaded with the man he saw as a father. There's still time. Zabuza shook his head before he coughed up blood. Blondie. Naruto heard this and walked over to the man before crouching at his side. The ex-Kiri ninja glanced to his side where the blonde was looking at him with concern etched onto his face. Does your offer still stand? Naruto's eyes widened before he looked up at Haku's weeping form. The brunette had his eyes clenched as he shook slightly. Losing one's precious person is never easy. It was a feeling Naruto knew all too well when he witnessed the deaths of the villagers in his future. He glanced at the dying man. Yes, Zabuza-san, want you to grant me my last wish. The young time traveler nodded. Haku deserves a home, the man panted. He deserves a place to belong. Naruto nodded. Of course, Zabuza-san. He shed a single tear for the man who had once been his enemy. He may not have known the man outside of this mission and his bingo book entry, but the death of anyone is cause for sadness. Zabuza smiled contentedly as the rise and fall of his chest ended as a single tear cascaded from the man's left eye. 72 Chapter 9. Standing at attention was the group known as Team 7 as their sensei gave the Hokage the report about their C-rank turn-a-rank mission. Naruto watched as the elderly man read through the report Kakashi had given him before glancing to his right and seeing Haku, the ice shinobi who had been entrusted to him by the dying missing nin known as Zabuza. The blonde couldn't wait to return home to his and Tenten's apartment for some well-deserved rest and relaxation. This is quite the report, Hiruzen muttered before cupping his hands over his desk. The elderly man looked over the four children in front of him. Naruto smiled at the man before glancing back at Haku. The former missing nin was standing stark still with an emotionless stone face. If anyone hadn't seen the rich earthen pupils, they would have mistaken him for a Hyuga. Sakura smirked while blushing as she looked at Sasuke from the corner of her eyes. The young Uchiha stood emotionless as ever in front of the Hokage. I suppose congratulations are in order, the elderly Hokage said as he placed his pipe in his mouth. You may be genin, but you held your own against unknown odds. Naruto subtly shook his head. Unknown odds? No odds were unknown to him. Hiruzen took a puff of his pipe before exhaling the smoke. You three, he pointed to Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi, are dismissed. The Hokage turned toward Naruto and Haku. You two, stay. Sakura glanced at the blonde with worry in her eyes. Naruto saw this and nodded, signaling the pinkett he would be all right. The young Kanoichi nodded before leaving the room behind Sasuke and Kakashi. Now, the Hokage said once the other three had left. What do we do with you? Naruto stepped forward. Gigi-chan, the blonde started. Zabuza-san asked for me to look after him. I intend to do just that. Hiruzen nodded. Yes, the report mentions something about a final request. What I want to know is where should we put Mr. Haku Yuki. Right, Haku-kun. We can't allow a member of this village to be without a home, the elderly Hokage said. He can stay with me, Naruto chirped. Hiruzen looked into the eyes of the young Jinchuriki. From my understanding, you're living with your girlfriend. How do you expect to accommodate for the extra person? Naruto looked back at Haku. He couldn't let him be sent elsewhere in the village. That's when he remembered it, his birthright, the Namikaze estate. We can move into Two-san's estate. The declaration surprised Hiruzen. To move Naruto, Tenten, and Haku into the Namikaze estate, it would mean revealing to the village Naruto's true heritage. While Hiruzen liked the thought of seeing all the people who have hurt or mocked the young blonde beg for forgiveness, this would also mean Minato's enemies outside of the village would know. He sighed. He knew it was only a matter of time till Naruto asked for his birthright. Very well, Hiruzen stated. However, you can't move until after I announce your heritage to the council. Naruto nodded. Haku looked between them, wondering why the blonde would need permission to move into his father's house. Then you may move yourself, Haku-kun, and your girlfriend in. Naruto nodded before he and Haku started walking toward the door. The ice ninja walked through it before the blonde turned back toward the elderly Hokage. Oh, and she's not my girlfriend. Hiruzen arched an eyebrow. She's my fiancé, he said, walking out of the room. Hiruzen stared at the place Naruto had once been. Break walking through the streets of Konoha was the young weapon mistress, the future Tenten Uzumaki. She smiled as the apartment she shared with her soon-to-be husband again came into view. In her hands was a katana her father made for Naruto as an early wedding. Sheath of the blade was a calming midnight blue, while the hilt of the sword was wrapped in orange-stained leather with a black cloth tied around it. Pinned to the side was a small metallic Uzumaki symbol. Walking through the front door, the young girl noticed 2 pairs of shoes. She arched an eyebrow before shrugging, able walking into the house. Entering the living room, Tenten noticed a very pretty girl sitting on her couch. Her right eye twitched. Who was this girl and what is she doing in her and Naruto's apartment? Hello, the girl said. The weapon mistress looked at her with narrowed eyes. Alright, came the voice of Naruto as he walked back into the living room. The blonde glanced over and saw Tenten was home. Oh, Ten-chan. Welcome home. Naruto walked over and planted a kiss on her cheeks, much to the weapon mistress's delight. So love, he stated, what's with the sword? Tenten held the sword up for her husband to take. Two-san made it for you. The blonde took the blade in hand. He removed the blade from its sheath and saw the blade had the kanji for fire engraved at the base. Wow, he said as he looked at the blade. He resheathed the blade. Remind me to thank him, next time I see him. The bun-haired girl nodded before turning back to Haku. So, are you going to introduce us or what? Koi, Naruto said softly, this is Haku-kun. The girl nodded. She had been told of the young ice user, however she never expected him to look so feminine. He'll be staying with us from now on, also he's a boy. Tenten looked at Haku, who in turn smiled and waved. The girl smiled back. Nice to meet you, Haku-kun. Haku bowed. Likewise, Tenten-san. The bun-headed girl smiled before taking Naruto by the arm and leading him into the kitchen. The blonde looked at the girl with confusion etched on his face. Naruto-kun, what's Haku-kun doing here? She whispered as to not alert the young ice ninja. He should be dead. The blonde time traveler nodded. Yeah, about that. He chuckled nervously and rubbed the back of his head. I kind stopped him from getting killed. Naruto-kun, she exclaimed a bit louder. Haku glanced at the two and began to get confused. The incredibly dangerous, time is a fragile thing. We can't be going around and altering everything we want. The blonde arched an eyebrow. When did you become so sage-like? I retained the yin half of Kurama, remember, she said as she poked the side of his head lightly. He says if we alter too much we could end up ruining everything. Naruto hummed. In truth, he did forget. His half of Kurama had been dormant from him until fairly recently. Flashback. Naruto opened his eyes once he heard the familiar sound of water dripping. His surroundings were that of the sewer that made up space in his mind that was reserved for housing the most powerful of Biju. Walking down the familiar corridors, he eventually found what he was looking for, large red wooden bars that made up the cage that contained Kurama. Hey, Kurama! Naruto exclaimed in excitement. The fox cracked open an eye and smirked as he saw his young friend. It's good to see you. It is, Kurama stated. To think my other half's crazy plan actually worked, the fox chuckled. Yeah, the blonde said as he gazed up at his friend. Can't believe I thought Ten-chan would kill me. Kurama laughed. Indeed, I was watching the exchange. Then why am I only hearing from you now? The giant fox shook his head. I had to break through the mental barriers that prevented us from making contact, Kurama explained. Breaking through the mental barriers was difficult. He almost cursed Minato for putting them up, however, if he didn't, Naruto would have ended up like Gaara. Now all that's left is the seal that separates us. Naruto smiled as he walked forward toward the paper seal that held the cage shut. As he grabbed the corner of the seal, he felt a hand grip his arm. Glancing over, he smiled as he saw him. Hello, Tu-chan. Minato Namikaze smiled as his son turned toward him before embracing him in a hug. Naruto-kun, I am glad I get to see you. Again, Naruto added. Minato broke the embrace as he looked his son up and down. He looked as if he was growing up well. Yeah, I am aware of your circumstance. The blonde father looked up to Kurama, who sat behind the bars. Thank you for saving my son. The fox shook his head. You should be thanking my other half, it was his idea, not mine. Yeah, came a voice from behind them. Naruto and Minato looked up and smiled as they saw Kushina Uzumaki. I don't think I like how much you've been lying, Naru-chan. Ka-chan, the young blonde said as he walked up to her before she glomped him in a bear hug. Minato sweet dropped at the duo in front of him, thankful this was the boy's mindscape, because if this was the real world, Naruto's bones would have broken. I am happy. The elder blonde smiled before glancing up at the once been the scourge of the shinobi world turned his son's dearest and closest friend. Is this really necessary? Naruto glanced back at the man, his resolve evident in his azure blue eyes. Yes, he said sternly, the crimes of Sasuke Uchiha are irredeemable, I've given him every chance and continue to give him every chance. The young Uzumaki walked to his father, if he betrays the village again, I will kill him. But to kill someone so young, Kushina said as she walked up behind him. Naruto shook his head. When you were sworn in as Hokage, he looked into his father's eyes. What was the oath you made? The man smiled, to protect the village. Quote. Whether it be to injury or death, the seventh Hokage finished for him. Minato smiled with pride. I am still alive, so I am not done yet. The elderly man ruffled his son's hair. Kushina's eyes glowed with pride. Kurama looked at the three as they shared their moment. His young Jinchuriki had really devoted himself to the role they now play. The Uchiha's actions lead to the death of hundreds, if left unchecked maybe thousands, Kurama stated, which gained him the attention of the three humans. If he starts down the path of darkness, we will kill him. The fox looked at the young blonde, together. Naruto smiled up at the fox as he walked toward the seal, gripping onto the paper seal he ripped it off the door, successfully unsealing the gates. The large wooden gates flew open as the fox's red chakra mingled with the boy's own blue chakra. The blonde felt the amazing rush of power for the second time in his 2 lifetimes, this time however he had the chance to truly appreciate the experience. It was as if something in him was swelling up and bursting outward into the golden chakra coat he had once worn at the end of the 4th Great Shinobi War. Minato looked upon his child with pride in his eyes. Kushina smiled as both the image of herself and her husband disappeared from Naruto's mindscape. Break, yeah, Naruto mumbled as he and Tenten walked back into the living room where they rejoined Haku. The couple looked at the ice ninja before looking at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. Haku-kun, Tenten said, gaining the attention of the feminine-looking male. There's something you should know. What would that be? Naruto took a seat on the couch next to Haku. Do you know what a Jinchuriki is? The ice ninja nodded. Of course, he knew what a Jinchuriki was. After all, the current Mizukage was one, he was the reason Haku was nearly killed, the reason he was forced to kill. 13 years ago the Kyuubi attacked this village. Haku nodded as to signal Naruto he was following along. In order to stop it, my father sealed it, in me. Haku was surprised. A Jinchuriki ruins his life and here he was living with one. I need a moment, he said as he got up and walked into the guest room. This was a delicate situation for the young ice boy as he had always held distance for Yagura who had started the bloodline purge. He was a Jinchuriki. He was a monster. Naruto is a Jinchuriki, but the blonde Haru's friend, he accepted him into his home without a second thought. Looking at the door Haku had just fled behind, Naruto was silent. He wanted Haku to understand that he was more than a Jinchuriki, that he was his friend. If not, blonde turned to his bun-haired wife. Think I should have waited until after I told him about the future stuff. Break, the elderly Hokage sighed as he leaned back in his chair. Time sure flies in when one is busy. It felt like only yesterday that the Konoha 9 graduated from the academy and already the Chunin exams were beginning. Hiruzen watched as the Jonin walked through the doors of his office. Greetings everyone, the old man said as he placed his pipe onto the desk. As you all know, that time of year has come again. Yeah, a Jonin in the crowd exclaimed, I saw the foreign genin arrive early this morning. The aging Hokage nodded, yes, so which of our own genin are capable of taking this exam? The Jonin looked at each other before Asuma Sarutobi stepped forward. I Asuma Sarutobi, Jonin sensei of Squad 10, nominate Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Naru, and Choji Akamaiki for the Chunin selection exams. Everyone looked at the chain smoker with wide eyes. Kakashi smirked under his face mask. Kakashi Hatake, Jonin Sensei of Squad 7 nominate Sasuke Uchiha, Naruto Uzumaki, and Sakura Haruno for the Chunin exams. Yash, exclaimed the ever-youthful Maida Guy. I made a guy nominate my youthful students as well. Everyone sweet dropped at the man's exuberance. Iruka stared wide-eyed at the Jonin nominated their students, guy he understood since they had a full year of training, but the others. Ikuranai Yuhi nominate my Genin squad Hinata Hyuga, Shino Aburame, Kiba Inuzuka for the Chunin selection exams. Now wait just a moment, the crowd turned toward the source of the proclamation to find that it was Iruka Yumino. Forgive my rudeness, but those names that were just called. I know them and they are definitely not ready for these exams. Kakashi sighed, Iruka-san, they are ready. I myself took these exams when I was no older than them. They're not you, the academy teacher exclaimed. Kakashi shook his head. No, they're better. This confused Iruka as he had been in charge of their training for 6 years. When they graduated, he knew neither of them was ready for something like this. Amongst my own team, Naruto's grown quite a lot. Some shinobi quirked an eyebrow as the man talked. Naruto Uzumaki, the most unpredictable knucklehead ninja, has grown up. It was almost unheard of. He's even taken it upon himself to help his teammate, Sakura Haruno, with her shortcomings, and Sakura's better for it. Others smiled at the thought of the young hero committing himself to teamwork so readily that he would help with the development of his teammate. Iruka, not seeing a way to poke a hole through his logic, sat down in a chair. He refused to believe these kids were ready. Look, Kakashi continued, if you don't believe me, test them yourself. I guarantee you'll be surprised by the people you meet. Oh, he will indeed. Break sparring was a great way to pass the time, which is why the genin of Squad 7 Naruto was having a light spar with Sakura to warm up for the day. As Sasuke watched, the blonde ducked a chakra-enhanced punch. He could practically hear her fist humming with chakra. The young time traveler struck her lower stomach before sliding around her. The pinkett disengaged the blonde and held her side as she channeled chakra to the afflicted area in order to heal the soreness. Damn it, Sakura said faintly. That was good, Naruto said while panting. You got faster. Sasuke watched the two. The young Uchiha may have had his differences with the Uzumaki boy, but he would be lying if he said he didn't acknowledge the boy's strength. So finding out that the pink-haired Kanoichi had become strong enough to give Naruto a challenge was something to brag about. The Uchiha rose from his spot and walked over to the duo. Naruto noticed this, cutting his eyes at the Uchiha. What's up? I want to spar, Sasuke said with determination in his eyes. Naruto sighed before stepping forward. The Uchiha shook his head. Not with you, Dobi, with her. Me, Sakura stuttered out. I can't, she shook her head fervently. I'm just barely strong enough to challenge Naruto-kun, no way will I be able to beat you. The blonde internally sighed at this. His current strength was far superior to the Uchiha. With the added boost of his and Kurama's partnership, he could take on Kakashi with some difficulty. He grabbed Sakura by the arm and pulled her away. Sakura-chan, you need to have more confidence in yourself, he told her. You're really strong, you could push Sasuke-san no problem. Sakura looked at him before turning back to Sasuke and turning back toward the blonde. She was still unsure and it was clear for the young blonde to see. Sakura-chan, he said softly so Sasuke couldn't hear him. You want him to notice you, right? The pinkett nodded. Well, this is your chance, show him how strong a woman you are. Right, she said with a newfound determination in her voice. Thanks, Naruto-kun, she turned back toward Sasuke. Alright Sasuke-kun, you're on. Break arriving at the training ground to meet his team, Kakashi Hatake came across a sight he never expected to see. Naruto was sitting on a boulder watching intensively as Sakura and Sasuke sparred. He saw the young pinkett slam a first into the Uchiha's outstretched palm. Sasuke smirked before leaping backward in order to create distance before running circles around the young Haruno. Seeing this, Sakura did something he hadn't thought possible for her. She threw a powerful punch into the ground, sending shockwaves into the very earth they stood upon and splintering it. Alright, Kakashi exclaimed, making his presence known. That's enough. The three genins walked over to their sensei expectantly. Hey sensei, Naruto greeted, what are we doing today? More missions. Nope. Are we learning new jutsu? Sasuke asked. Again Kakashi shook his head. Maybe more advanced chakra control exercises. Sakura guessed. No, Kakashi said, all good guesses but alas none of you got it right. In fact, I've signed you three up for the upcoming Chunin exams. Reactions were varied amongst the children. Sasuke smirked but overall kept his stoic figure. Sakura beamed at the thought of her sensei, thinking she was ready for these exams. She was excited, and for good reason. Since graduation, she had put in a lot of work, and now it was finally time for the whole village to see the fruits of her labor. Naruto smiled widely at the news before slinging an arm over Sakura's shoulder and chuckling. Sakura began giggling as a response. Alright, you three, Kakashi stated, I want you all to prepare for the exams, so today's training's being cancelled. This left the rest of the day open for Naruto and his team. The blonde bid farewell to his team before walking away. Hey Sasuke-kun, would you like to continue our spar? Naruto heard Sakura say as he was walking away. The Uchiha looked at her. He hummed. Sure. 72 Chapter 10. Walking into the room that housed the first phase of their exams, Naruto was hyper aware of all the murderous looks their fellow exam takers were giving them. Sakura had a look in her eyes that was an odd mixture of concern and determination. He smiled at this and patted her on the shoulder. He liked that look in her eyes. It showed that she was confident in her ability to pass and showed that she wasn't cocky, unlike their third teammates. Sasuke Uchiha, both Sakura's childhood crush and Naruto's worst enemy, the Uchiha had an arrogant look in his eyes that spoke of how superior he was compared to the rest of these genin. Sasuke-kun, came the ear-piercing shriek of one Ino Yamanaka as she glomped onto the object of her affection. Naruto sighed and shook his head. I suppose some things never change. Ino pig, get off of Sasuke-kun, Sakura exclaimed. Yes, some things never change. Even after all the training and progress they had made in making Sakura a splendid Kunoichi in hopes of garnering the affections of the last Uchiha and subsequently keeping him from breaking all ties with the village, after all that Sakura's still a fangirl in some aspect. Oh forehead girl, I see they let you in, Ino said as she took her hands off Sasuke and placed them on her hips as she taunted Sakura. I see they'll let anyone enter these exams. Speaking of anyone, where's that loser dead last? This got Sakura angry, not solely because she insulted her but because she insulted her best friend. Naruto had selflessly sacrificed his spare time, which he could have used to better his own training or spend more time with his fiancée, but instead spent it correcting her own skills. The Pinkett was about to say something in defense of her friend but was stopped by a hand on her shoulder courtesy of Naruto. The blonde time traveler didn't want a fight between the two breaking out, especially not in a room full of enemies. So to end the argument, he placed a hand on Sakura's shoulder and shook his head. The Pinkett backed down, fully understanding that Naruto could protect himself. My, Ino-chan, I can't believe you've forgotten me, the boy said, gaining the attention of the group, and here I thought what we had was special. The girl in question was speechless at the sight of her fellow blonde. Was this Naruto? Where was the hideous orange jumpsuit? While the boy in front of her did have Naruto's spiky blonde hair, sapphire blue eyes and those whisker marks on his cheeks, his outfit was something that was very unlike the Naruto she had last seen at the academy all those months ago. The boy wore a black sleeveless muscle shirt that hugged his body a little too well for a nose comfort. Over the shirt he had a dark green jacket that cut off just above his navel. He wore black Anbu issue pants with similarly black ninja sandals. The only shred of orange on him was an armband he wore on his right arm just under his shoulder. And Naruto, is that you? The boy nodded. When did you get so ripped? Naruto tilted his head in confusion as to how he should answer this. Sure, Yaour could say he busted his ass ever since they graduated, and while that was true they would ask why, and frankly he couldn't get into it. Hard to show muscle, while wearing a baggy jumpsuit. A boy walked up to them. Troublesome, the pineapple-headed genin said. What's with the whole change? What happened to the orange monstrosity? Naruto hummed in aggravation. My fiancé burned them. This was not a lie. When they had moved into the Namikaze estate, she had set the lot of them on fire with a fire jutsu the first chance she got. The remark about a fiancé got everyone's attention. Sakura shook his head. It wasn't so bad, Naruto-kun. Ino's eyes widened. You can still wear orange, just not a kill me orange full body outfit. The boy in question rubbed at the back of his head. I suppose. If he had planned on continuing his sentence, no one knows, for they were interrupted by a hard thud as a head of platinum blonde hair fell hard. Ino had fainted, and to everyone but Hinata they had no idea as to why. The lavender-eyed Hyuga was devastated at the implications of Sakura referring to her Naruto-kun and kun. You guys are quite loud. Everyone turned and saw a silver-headed boy. It took everything in his now to scowl or outright attack the boy in front of him. Kabuto Yakushi stared at the group before looking down and seeing a very unconscious Ino. With a sigh he knelt down and began using his medical ninjutsu to wake her up. If you hadn't noticed all these genin are on edge, it would do you all well to keep quiet and lay low. Kiba looked at the boy as he finished healing Ino. Naruto placed a hand on his own stomach as a way to calm Kurama, who was snarling at the snake's right-hand man. Who are you? Choji said as the boy stood. Naruto never took his eyes off him. My name's Kabuto Yakushi, and I've been to these exams enough times to tell you what's what around here. So, Sasuke said as he looked at Kabuto, you're like what? An informant. The snake with glasses hummed, yeah, I guess you can think of it like that, Kabuto said as he took a scroll out of his back pocket and placed it on the ground before pushing chakra into it and a stack of cards appeared. See these are my ninja info cards. I am real good at gathering info on just about anything. People, places, you name it. The group looked amongst themselves, begrudgingly Naruto had to agree. No informant was as in-depth as Kabuto, not even some of Jiraiya's spies. Do you have information of Rock Lee of the Leaf, Gaara of the Sand, and Naruto Uzumaki of the Leaf? The group were shocked at this as two of those three names were fellow Leaf ninja, and one of them was his own teammate. Naruto looked at him incredulously, as if he could not believe what the Uchiha had just said. Oh, you know their names, Kabuto pouted, that's no fun. The boy shrugged, oh well, let's see first up Rock Lee, he said as he pulled out a card and channeled chakra into it. Rock Lee, current age is 15. Is a member of Team 9 along with his teammates Tenten and Neji Hyuga, his sensei is Miyato Gai. He has practically no skill in ninjutsu and genjutsu while his taijutsu is spectacular. He's completed 57 D rank missions, 23 C rank, 32 B rank, 4 A rank and 1 S rank as a genin. Next is Gaara of the Sand, let's see, the boy grew shocked, he's completed 89 D rank missions, 74 C rank, 55 B rank, 22 A rank and 15 S ranked missions as a genin. Everyone was shocked at this, apparently he did all these without getting a scratch on him. Finally Naruto Uzumaki, it says he's a war orphan of Konoha. Naruto rolled his eyes. He's on Team 7 along with Sasuke Uchiha and Sakura Haruno. His sensei is Kakashi Hatake. He, apparently completed 32 D rank missions, 0 C rank, 1 B rank, 1 A rank and 0 S rank missions as a genin. He's currently engaged to Tenten from Team 9, this surprised everyone that didn't already know. Kiba glared at Naruto, what the hell man, you skipped C ranks altogether and did both A, B and A. The dog boy was angry for sure, he was supposed to be the kick-ass genin of the rookie 9, not the dead last. Naruto narrowed his eyes at Kiba but wasn't really annoyed by him. That B rank wasn't supposed to be known by anyone but the Hokage. After all, it was the night that he had killed the traitor Mizuki. Alright, a man wearing a black jacket said as he bursts into the room. Naruto recognized the man as the Proctor Ibiki, also known as the head of torture and interrogation. Everyone sit down and shut up. Break. Naruto sat down next to Hinata and sighed as he saw the girl flush and fidget. This was something he would have to deal with. He couldn't let her still be chasing after him romantically, he was engaged after all, which meant this was a job for Naruto Uzumaki, professional matchmaker. The first choice was obviously Kiba, but the dog boy was far from the ideal boyfriend material he believed Hinata deserved. Sure, in the future he was kinda good enough, but was he good enough was the question. Shikamaru was also a good choice, he was smart and caring, but he ended up married to Tamari and there was no way in hell he was going to mess that up. Shino was a good choice being on the same team as her and all. Choji was an option but that made Naruto shudder at who may end up with Karui in the future. The blonde sighed as he thought about it, who was left? Shrugging these thoughts off, the young Uzumaki returned his attention to the sheet of paper before him. He might as well answer at least some of these questions, nothing else to do until the 10th question was announced. The blonde got to work. Was it technically cheating if he was using future knowledge he had obtained? After all, he didn't know this stuff until after he became the Hokage. This question perplexed him so much that he didn't even notice when he had answered 5 of the 9 questions. With a sigh he turned the paper over to the blank side and began to write a note to Ibiki. Keep an eye on Kabuto Yakushi, he has information that only the Hokage should. He wrote before turning the paper back over and resting his arms on it and his head on his arms. Knowing Ibiki, the young time traveler knew he would report this directly to the Hokage and without a doubt, Naruto would be called in to talk with the old man. Alright, Ibiki said when a large majority of the teams had been eliminated. Naruto raised his head and looked at the man. It's time for your 10th question. People cheered as this signaled the approaching end of the first exam. This test made Naruto a mental wreck the first time around so he could relate to everyone's elation. But first I want to give each of you the chance to back out now. Why the hell would we back out now? Kiba's unmistakable voice shouted. Because, if you were to get this question wrong you would be barred from taking the Chunin exams ever again. Gasps of shock were heard all around the room. Naruto internally chuckled at this and remembered once when he had acted as a proctor for these exams, it was fun messing with the kids. What the hell, there are people here who've taken this exam before. You can't do this, Kiba shouted in agitation. Oh, I can and I am. These other kids didn't have me as a proctor, Ibiki said with a smirk as he saw some genin squads leaving. Naruto remembered how hopeless it felt for him and it made him angry. He remembered how Sakura had tried to quit for him. Yeah right, came the voice of the blonde as he stood up. Remember this and remember it well, the ninja who will become Hokage is me, Naruto Uzumaki. I don't care if I am a genin for the rest of my life, believe it. His little outburst seemed to do the trick as a trio of students who were about to stand sat back down, their confidence renewed. Ibiki smiled as he glared at the young boy who had single-handedly given the entire class the confidence to continue. Is that so? He said with a cocky smirk that promised pain. When he saw no one make a move he smiled. Congratulations, you all pass. Break. Standing outside of the forest of death the trio know as Team 7 were listening to the proctor. Naruto was listening extra intently. Alright maggots, when you hand in you waivers then come to that tent. She pointed to a tent with 2 large crates and a table. Where you will be given 1 scroll. By the end of these 5 days you will be expected to get the other scroll and be at the tower in the center of the forest. Team 7 was first to enter the tent with their handouts. Sasuke smirked as he slid a earth scroll into his back pocket. No one was any the wiser when the young blonde slipped away from their view for a moment before reappearing moments later. Naruto sighed. Hey wait, came the voice of Anko. The blonde silently sweated as he turned toward the purple-haired Jonin with confusion etched on his face. It was a risky move trying to swipe a heaven's scroll out from under the nose of the woman, even riskier when using the stealth skills she helped him cultivate. Of course she would notice his movements, after all, they were based on her own. You're Naruto Uzumaki, right? The time traveler nodded. Yeah. Anko nodded. I hear you're getting married, be careful for her sake. The blonde would have sighed a deep sigh of relief if he wasn't currently in the woman's presence. He bowed slightly and offered a quick, I will, before leaving and walking toward his team. Anko smirked as she watched the kid who had just skillfully stolen a heaven scroll out from under her nose walk away. Damn, that kid's good. Team 7 waited patiently for the gates in front of them to open, and when it did the trio leapt into the trees as blurs before landing in a clearing about 4 to 5 miles away from the starting gate. Naruto turned toward his teammates who looked at him. Sakura had an expectant look in her eye as she smiled warmly at best friend, and Sasuke had a slightly annoyed expression married to his face. Guys, I have a plan. The Uchiha scoffed. Now you have a plan, he said as a soft jab at his blonde teammate. Naruto blew him a raspberry before pulling out a white scroll from his ninja pouch. The blonde smirked as did the ravenet. Sakura gasped, Naruto-kun, you stole a heaven scroll. The boy looked at her with a slight pout. You could have gotten us in trouble. Relax, Sakura-chan. Surprisingly, this did not come out of the blonde's mouth. The pinkett and blonde looked surprised that Sasuke Uchiha had referred to his teammate with such affection. Sakura blushed as she looked down as if her feet became the most interesting thing in the world. Naruto smiled as he saw his plan starting to bear fruit. We are ninja and ninja don't play fair. The Uchiha turned around as to walk in the direction of the tower. Naruto looked from him to his female teammate and smiled as he saw her blushing. He leaned in. He called you, Chan, Naruto said in a teasing manner before Sakura playfully slapped his arm and began walking. The blonde chuckled at himself as he began walking with his hands cupped behind his head.